I love Dead by Daylight's cast of characters. I might not always like everything about each one. Some characters have powers I like but lore I don't, while others might have lore and a power I like but a visual design I have problems with. Or their perks might suck, or their animations might be lame. There's a lot in a DBD character, and a big challenge Behaviour faces is making all these elements feel cohesive, making it so that the character you're playing in the game feels like the same character you read about in their lore or watch in a licensed movie. The teachable perk system is part of that synthesis between characters and game pieces. Perks are aspects of the character distilled into gameplay modifiers that can be shared between characters. This process gets gamified by players optimizing their builds for gameplay performance at the cost of character expression. But today we're doing things just a little bit differently. We're going to be going through every killer and making a full perk build designed to express their character as they're presented in their lore or visual design. And I promise I'm not just doing this to rip off Otz's new video. Here, look, I have the screenshots. I've been working on this for ages now, but I got distracted by my killer being put through a mincing machine. But this isn't just going to be a rehash of Otz's video. Obviously we both have different opinions about which perks we'd consider lore friendly, but beyond that we've both got different sets of rules that we worked on to make our lists. For this list, I decided I needed to use each perk in the game at least once in this list, with no perk ever being used more than twice. And every character can have no more than one of their own teachable perks, because every killer's lore build could just as easily have been their adept otherwise. Oh, and I did play with all these builds myself for background footage, and yeah, there's definitely some perks here. Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, to a lore-friendly build for every killer in Dead by Daylight. For the Trapper, we have Brutal Strength, Oppression, Pop Goes the Weasel, and Thrilling Tremors. Evan McMillan, or the Trapper, spent his entire life as more or less an unwilling pawn, going from his dad's muscle as the enforcer of the McMillan estate to the entity's muscle as a killer in the fog. Brutal Strength and Pop Goes the Weasel both seem like fitting expressions of that. Let's check out the flavour text on these perks. Your Great Strength allows you to shred through your prey's defences. It is more than muscles, a dark power motivates the beast. A deep bond with the entity unlocks great strength. Archie only ever really valued Evan for his strength. He was a workhorse of his father's will, and the only change the entity made to that was changing who his new master was. Oppression reflects his role as the enforcer of his father's union-busting activities, while also alluding to how Evan was victimised by his father himself. And Thrilling Tremors represents the entity's claim laid on Evan once he was taken into the fog. It's stated more than once in some of the very old lore that it took a lot of torture and mind-breaking to press gang Evan into the entity's service as a killer. So the entity claiming the generators during the ritual act of hooking, I think is a potent visual metaphor for Evan's loss of identity and sense of self at the entity's hands. For the Wraith we have Scourge Hook Jagged Compass, Blood Warden, Fire Up, and Hex Retribution. Sometimes the compass points north, other times it points somewhere else entirely. That's the flavour text of Scourge Hook Jagged Compass, but it could also be on the blurb of Wraith's biography. Here we have a man who travelled the ocean looking for a better life for himself, only to wind up back where he started. He was only a boy when horror arrived on his doorstep in Nigeria. He lost everything he loved to the genocide and took retribution with fire, even as it burned him too. He ran to Azerov's junkyard to find himself a better life, but even then he couldn't escape the bloodshed. And that's where the choice of Blood Warden takes on several different connotations. On one hand, he was a literal warden in his youth, looking out to watch for attacks, and it was his failure at this job that caused 2 separate massacres. But Blood Warden is also a symbol of inevitability. Perhaps more than any other perk, it evokes the idea of no escape. And Philip sealed the fates of several victims in that car crusher while also never escaping the shadow of violence that plagued him. So Blood Warden felt just natural, really. For the Hillbilly we have Sloppy Butcher, Barbecue and Chili, Remember Me, and Wretched Fate. Millies rejoice because Billy's got 2 M1 perks in this list, Sloppy Butcher and Remember Me. Remember Me in this build has a double meaning. It makes escaping take longer, which evokes the image of his lifelong struggle to escape his cell, but also his entire tome story can be loosely described as a memory come back for revenge. His parents effectively forgot he was human, forgot their own son was in that monster they kept locked away, and Max reminded them brutally that he had never left, that he had never forgotten what they did. Sloppy Butcher, I think, is an accurate term to describe how he did that. The ways he finished off the corrupt cops was nothing short of brutal, and while he did it, he struggled to differentiate between their human lives and the lives of the farm animals he was forced to kill for his parents' amusement. That's where barbecue and chili comes in as well. There's a lot of symbolism for Billy relating to pigs and animals for the slaughter, and the idea of turning the survivors metaphorically or literally into barbecue does kind of blur that line. For the nurse, we have a nurse's calling, bitter murmur, claustrophobia, and hysteria. For a head of care at a mental institution, then claustrophobia should be fairly self-explanatory. Just like her patients, she was confined to conditions that caused devastating effects to her mental health, and when she finally broke and killed the patients and staff at the asylum, she'd been effectively confined to Crotus Pren, if not physically but emotionally, for decades, making her no different from her patients. Hysteria also relates specifically to a kind of mania that women were diagnosed with during the era where mental health was pathologized before it was understood. And given Sally's deteriorating mental health alongside her patients, I think it fits perfectly. Bitter Murmur is kind of the oddball here, but given that Nurse has breathing problems and was pushed to work at the asylum after a heartbreaking early death, a perk that alludes to lung or heart conditions, like, for example, a murmur, I think fits her pretty well. Plus the connotation of supernatural tracking to guide you, I think makes a lot of sense for someone who's blinded by the entity and guided and carried through the realm solely by its power. A nurse's calling is, it's pretty obvious. I'll be calling this the nurse's calling clause from here on in, because if a killer's perk has their name in it, it just sort of feels wrong to give it to anybody else. For Michael Myers, we have Predator, Thanatophobia, Hex Devour Hope, and Insidious. We have our first licensed lore build here with Michael Myers, and we're just starting out with Predator because there's something about Myers that sets him apart from just a bog-standard serial killer. Michael doesn't do what he does with any amount of self-awareness, but simply because that's what he does. He is evil incarnate. He's a force of nature more than a man, for whom Haddonfield and its people are just consequences. So a perk that dehumanizes him as just a predator, I think, works here. Thanatophobia and Devour Hope, I think, both express Michael's effect on Laurie, Loomis, and even the audience, as he slowly takes over the movie. As Michael goes on his rampage throughout Haddonfield, the fear of death catches up to Loomis and Laurie, and Michael's actions become increasingly destructive as his kills rack up and Laurie's chances of survival look worse and worse. Insidious felt like a no-brainer as well. It's the Stalker perk. Michael spends the first half of the movie as an unnoticeable, terrifying threat, watching from behind bushes or just at the edge of your point of view. I can't think of a better word to describe him than Insidious. For the Hag, we have Hex the Third Seal, Dominance, Scourge Hook Monstrous Shrine, and Shattered Hope. Hag's lore is, not what I would call good, so perhaps it's fitting that Hag's build here sucks too. You know we're starting out strong when the first perk in the build is Third Seal. Hag introduced the concept of hexes to the game with this perk, and I think there's been any hex made since Third Seal that feels more like a survivor actually being cursed by a hex, except maybe Plaything, something that Third Seal's flavor text directly alludes to. And the name suggesting a specific spell or curse laid on its victims is to this day still more Hag's domain than anybody else's. Monstrous Shrine and Shattered Hope, I think, both evoke the idea of purity or safety being corrupted by the horrifying life she was forced into. She was a spiritual young girl who grew up in a deeply religious community, but that spiritualism and tradition, passed down by her grandmother, became twisted and distorted into a tool of violence, and Monstrous Shrine reflects that, I think, as it turns the basement and Scourge Hooks into a shrine to the entity's power. Shattered Hope fits similarly too, as you destroy the healing and protective magic of the survivors. Dominance feels like a slightly odd choice here perhaps, but go with me on this journey. More than any other killer story, except maybe Artist or Spirit, Hag's lore treats her as a helpless victim, who uses the power of the entity to regain that agency in her life. It's a story of, dominance and control, as Lisa loses control of her life, her body, and even her identity. And the perk's protective and territorial effect fits with Lisa's territorial nature after her transformation into the Hag. For the Doctor, we have Overcharge, Surge, Hex Plaything, and Terminus. Doctor is one of Dead by Daylight's most evocative original killers. Everything about him, from his visual design to his power, affirms identity as an unethical mad scientist performing extreme electroshock experiments, and Overcharge and Surge are just more ways for that power to be expressed. Not only is overcharging or remotely damaging a generator pretty fitting for Electricity Man, the accelerating regression of Overcharge also mirrors the escalation of Herman's experiments and path to madness and power. The more he was left alone, literally to his own devices, the worse Herman's methods became until he had gone too far, even for the CIA. Plaything, I think, is a great expression of Herman's sadism that we see displayed in his tome. While he'll experiment on anyone, He singled out the good doctor as his favourite test subject because it got on his nerves, and even experimented on his parents and animals simply to see what would happen. So everyone getting their own personal hex they have to run around to cleanse would be amusing for someone as sadistic as Herman. And when you realise the exact kind of scheming bastard that Herman Carter is, Terminus felt right too. He's a canon chess player who sees everyone in his life as another piece in his great game, and has an exhaustive plan to get himself out of trouble for mind-controlling his entire study group. Whether he's as smart as he thinks he is or not, the Doctor is a conniving, scheming shit. Judging by the product description, that fits Terminus to a T. For Leatherface the Cannibal, we have Territorial Imperative, Sloppy Butcher, Mad Grit, and Iron Grasp. Bubba Sawyer's DBD lore affirms that more than most killers, he kills for the entity out of fear. He's not inherently aggressive per se, but he's deeply protective and territorial, which fits with the movie where he basically never leaves the house, and protects the rest of the family. As such, a territorial build felt like it would fit, starting with, well, Territorial Imperative. But Mad Grit and Iron Grasp I think also sell Bubba's role as this workhorse of his family. He's strong, but not in like a fighting way, in a hard physical labour type of way, and I think Iron Grasp reflects that pretty well. While Mad Grit reflects his fanatical devotion to his family. He will literally carry any burden for them and kill anybody who might threaten their way of life. Sloppy Butcher rounds out the perk selection because, yeah, just look at him. This man's not exactly what you'd call clean. Did I just make Basement Leatherface and call it a lore-friendly build? Well, sort of, yeah, but I think it's appropriate for Leatherface of all characters to focus on putting the meat somewhere safe and storing it for later, protecting it from anyone who might try to mess with his prize slaughter. And thus concludes my argument that Leatherface should have his anti-camp removed. But, as a topic for another video. For the Huntress, we have I'm All Ears, Deerstalker, Hex Huntress's Lullaby, and Hex Thrill of the Hunt. First things first, I'm absolutely invoking the Nurse's Calling defense for Huntress's Lullaby. For Christ's sake, there's literally a gameplay mechanic called a lullaby introduced and attached to the Huntress. Who else is that meant to give this to? Deerstalker and Thrill of the Hunt both work too to showcase Anna's own inability to process the difference between humans and animals. She hunts whatever moves in her woods because to hunt and kill is in her nature. It's her reason to be, and that's all there is to it. She's regularly underestimated by those who haven't heard the legends and ghost stories of the monster in the woods, and we see this in her tome, where she disassembles a squad of soldiers like there's nothing to it. I'm All Ears is a great way to express that territorial awareness and strategy. She might not know how to feed children, but she's an expert tracker and hunter. A lot of her victims don't even realise just how close they are to death, until it sends a hatchet hurtling into their skull. For the Nightmare on Elm Street himself, Freddy Krueger, we have Dying Light, Save the Best for Last, Mindbreaker, and Rancor. I specifically based this build off the remake version of Freddy as featured in the game, but whether we're talking England or Healy, the modus operandi of both killers is the same. More than most slashers, Freddy Krueger is defined by two key features: obsession and inevitability. Freddy's motivations for his killings are generally very personal. He'll kill anyone if he gets the chance to, but he's always had his victims that he's preferred, and often wouldn't kill them right away, preferring to toy with them and, well, save them for last. So Save the Best for Last seemed ideal. In the remake version especially, Freddy had a particular fondness for Nancy, and had a specific gruesome fate awaiting her, as she'd be stuck in a coma with no escape from the dream world if he got his way with her. Rancor feels like a great expression of that final grisly fate. Freddy's chosen victim isn't just killed like so many others, but they're more like a special treat that he'll set aside for himself after a hard movie's work killing side characters and making corny jokes. The inevitability of human fatigue is Freddy's other defining characteristic. No matter how brave or strong you are, eventually you will have to fall asleep, and when you do, you're his to torment how he likes. Dying Light and Mindbreaker expresses that idea of dread and fatigue mounting as Freddy does his bloody work. Mindbreaker literally exhausts you as you perform basic tasks over and over again, which is symbolic of your ability to resist sleep draining away as you figure out how to beat him. It's honestly a perk that feels like it was made for Freddy, far more fitting for him than it ever was for the Demogorgon. Dying Light, being an obsession perk that causes the team to become less efficient over time, plays both angles at once. It affirms the idea that one person, usually Nancy, is stuck in the middle of Freddy's game, and the longer he's allowed to run rampant without being stopped, the more he can capitalise on his victims' mounting fatigue, and the more desperate everyone becomes to stop him. For Amanda Young, the Pig, we have Deadlock, No Way Out, Eruption, and Tinkerer. All movies have rules, especially horror movies, but Saw more than any other makes those rules abundantly clear. And while Amanda may not follow her mentor's exact rules, she still has her own methods that remain consistent throughout all the Saw movies, and these can be expressed in her perks. Just like all the other Jigsaw killers, Amanda is a skilled engineer and gadget maker. She learned so much under John's tutelage and built contraptions that rivaled his own in complexity and brutality. Tinkerer asserting that idea while also providing information and stealth to the killer that allows him to control the trial is just a shoo-in, really. Eruption also fits her methodical, technical nature, as well as the proclivity of the Jigsaw killers to misdirect and trick victims into the perfect stitch-up. We see in Saw 2 and 10 where Amanda baits, tricks and misleads the others around her, so the pieces of her and John's great game fall into place. A perk that traps a generator so it's rigged to blow and disrupts anyone foolish enough to be working on it seems like a good fit. The rest of the perks all keep to Amanda's personal creed as a Jigsaw apprentice and the hallmark that set her apart from her peers. The inescapable trap. Amanda believed the victims of many of her traps deserved to die, and that they were truly irredeemable, and dying in her traps was almost a kind of cruel mercy or absolution in death. To that end, she would jam the locks in her own traps to make them unable to be released, and she would weld the doors shut to the trial room so that her victims had, well, no way out. They couldn't leave even if they passed the test. Deadlock and no way out are ultimately unavoidable obstacles. Just through the standard nature of playing the game, they will affect you, they will strangle your progress, and they seem absolutely ideal to express that element of Amanda's character. For the clown, we have coulrophobia, unnerving presence, dark devotion, and game afoot. Yep, it's happening again. I'm invoking the nurse's calling defense one more time, but I promise this is the last one this time. Nobody else gets coulrophobia except him. He is an actual clown, so just, yeah, shut up. Kenneth Chase's clown disguise serves two purposes. It hides identity so that he can conceal himself away in the circus, but also gives him a genuinely disconcerting appearance to anybody who comes too close. He's sticky and gross and menacing, and he knows it. It's all part of the fun for him. And as such, unknowing presence felt like a best way to express that. Dark Devotion kinda offers two separate meanings here. One more mechanical, and one concerning the name of the perk itself. Dark Devotion is a perk themed around misdirection and disruption. You know there's a threat around and you're on high alert, but you don't exactly know where it is until it's too late, and that's how Kenneth Chase operates. He's just unnerving enough that you're uncomfortable around him just because it's fun, but he stays just enough on the right side of plausible deniability to avoid getting caught, just like John Wayne Gacy did. But as the servants of the entity go, he's one of the more straightforwardly loyal ones, because he gets everything he could ever want out of his deal as a killer in the fog. The power and freedom to hunt helpless victims without anyone being able to stop him. It's no wonder he's such a faithful servant of the entity's designs. Game Afoot's an interesting one here too, because I did originally have Play With Your Food in this spot, but the difference that gives Clown Game Afoot instead is a question of how the two perks explore the obsession mechanic. Game Afoot is an obsession switching perk. You become fixated on the person you're chasing, but that's not a personal thing. You're a small child with jangling keys dangled in front of them, but that's as far as your obsession goes. Play With Your Food is a bit more personal. You've got your one victim, but they're your special one, and while you'll hurt those around them without thinking, you want to make that one person suffer before the end. Clown definitely fits more in the former camp. He targets specific people, but not because he's connected with them or invested in hurting them personally. His obsession is more like a gourmand at a restaurant who enters a new town and finds his new favourite cafe to eat at. So Game Afoot feels like a shoe-in here. And playing with Game Afoot changes the context on Dark Devotion too, since you'll be disconcerting and catching the entire team off guard and sowing chaos, in the way that Kenneth himself is shown to be doing in his tome, simply because he can. For the Spirit, we have Dissolution, Coup de Grace, Hex Retribution, and Scourge Hook, Floods of Rage. For a long time I struggled to think of perks I could do for Spirit, because so many of them could have applied to her or many other killers who could have suited them better, like Nemesis, Devour Hope, Blood Favor, or Deathbound. Once I realised Dissolution fit perfectly, it all sort of slid into place. Rin's shattered life identity are one of her core visual themes, from the shards of glass in her body, to her broken sword, to the chapter's name itself. What happened to Rin broke her entirely as a person, and broke her family apart with it. Dissolution causing things to spontaneously break near her, especially after the shedding of blood, just felt natural for Rin thematically. Floods of Rage and Retribution continue to show Rin's metamorphosis into the Spirit. She made her agreement with the entity to bring her back as a killer so she could enact her revenge on her father for destroying their family. But the rage she embodied that saw that transformation taking place is only partially hers. Her ancestor Kazan Yamaoka instilled within his entire family line that same rage through his years of violent bloodshed, and Rin's death rekindled that rage in her. An out-of-control surge of wrath that's kind of foreign to her, as we can see in her first tome lore. But my favourite here is coup de grace, because we can see in her first home story, Rin is a trained swordswoman. She took kendo classes at her father's insistence, she even has a skin for it. And while she didn't really like the lessons, she beat several assailants into submission in her first home story. A lunging perk for a skilled sword duelist who wields a katana in the fog. It only makes sense, really. For the Legion, we have Unrelenting, Furtive Chase, Forever Entwined, and Friends Till the End. Next to the more skilled or powerful residents of the fog, the Legion are probably the normalist killers. They're inexperienced at the act of killing, only having one confirmed kill between all four of them, and regularly acting impulsively or making mistakes. Unrelenting, I think, evokes that idea pretty well, of supplementing the lack of experience or skill with sheer enthusiasm. Forever Entwined and Friends to the End, I think, express the double-edged sword of the Legion's friendship. They have each other's backs, but that only means that when one of them goes down or crosses a line, the others are inevitably dragged down with them too, and Frank and Julie use that relationship to manipulate the others. Furtive Chase expresses that pretty nicely. The furtive indicates a level of nervousness or insecurity in what you're doing, which is a pretty accurate descriptor of what Susie and Joey feel as Legion members, and you can read this in the Susie and Joey editions of the Legion comic book, which I all recommend you do, by the way. For the Plague, we have Whispers, Corrupt Intervention, Grim Embrace, and Hex Blood Favour. The theme of this Plague build is the Entity's direct involvement. For Adiris' entire life, she was just a piece in the Entity's game, and whenever she risked deviating too far from its path, it masqueraded as her god and, well, whispered to her, to put things back on track. Blood Favour, demanding a sacrifice of pain to earn the Entity's favour, fits with Adiris' history of human sacrifice. And at the end of her story, the Entity intervened to save her and her followers when the time came, and Adiris was at rock bottom. Grim Embrace is another Entity blocker perk, so it fits here nicely. Plus it has a level of intimacy to it, perhaps mirroring her closest to her father Haban, who was responsible for and was killed by her religious devotion. When her faith was waning and her love for Haban was winning out, she literally heard the voice of the Entity in her head, and it drove her to acts of bloodshed in its worship even as the population sickened and the responsibilities piled onto her. And when it all came tumbling down and Adiris was despondent and desperate, the Entity took her into the fog and saved her congregation from their sickness. A sort of evil divine intervention. I'm sure there's a word for that somewhere, but I just can't put my finger on it. For Danny Johnson, the Ghostface, we have Strider, Surveillance, Bamboozle, and Iron Maiden. DBD's version of Ghostface is very different from Scream's various takes on the character. Scream's ghosties were just fairly normal people with normal human flaws. Apart from Roman, they're not what you would really call professionals. Danny Johnson is far, far more effective than any of them. He watches his victims with precision and dedication for weeks, tracks their routine and maps out their neighbourhood and home so he can navigate in the dark even better than they can, catch them unawares, and gut them like a fish. Surveillance reflects Danny's exhaustive research as he documents everything about his victims before he strikes. He's immensely detail-oriented, and Surveillance, offering consistent, precise information, reflects that. Strider and Iron Maiden showcase his ability to navigate in close spaces and ambush you at close quarters. You might think you're safe from him in a hiding spot or right around the corner, but no, you're not going to lose him that easily. Plus, he seems to really like finding people inside lockers, so it just felt right, really. Bamboozle is chosen both as a reflection of his relative agility as a normal-sized human, but also his connection with the Entity, as it gives him a helping hand sometimes. It follows Danny around the trials directly, something that you can see as it holds the tendrils up on his coat to give it an extra spooky effect. Danny Johnson is the Entity's little handbag dog, and he loves every minute of it. For the Demogorgon, we have Call of Brine, Overcharge, Predator, and Beast of Prey. The Demogorgon was DBD's first creature killer, and to this day it's probably the creaturiest killer to date. It's implied that the Xenomorphs and evil tulpas and whatever the fuck unknown is all have a flicker of genuine intelligence somewhere in their inhuman minds, but the Demogorgon is literally just a weird animal. And as such, Predator and Beast of Prey feel like natural inclusions here. They evoke an image that's far from the meticulous hunters or hulking monsters of the other killers. The Demogorgon is a feral, opportunistic skulker, and these perks encourage you to catch a player out in the middle of a chase through the unpredictable behaviour they enable. Call of Brine and Overcharge are another perk combo that fit well with Upside Down's documented ability to interfere with electronics. This is something that definitely got toned down in the later seasons, but it definitely still works, I think. And it helps that Call of Brine is a water-themed perk, which consistently fits with how the Mind Flayer and its minions are themed. They're all wet and slimy. Their larval stages look like newts or lizards. The monster in Season 2 grew in the sewers. The Demogorgon is in Russia, were kept in oxygenated tanks, and they're vulnerable to fire and heat. It all just fits together a little too nicely for a perk that also happens to fuck with the generated electronics. For Kazan Yamaoka the Oni, we have Zanshin Tactics, Enduring Floods of Rage, and Forced Penance. As DBD's first sequel chapter, it shouldn't be surprising that Oni's build bears some similarity to his descendant the Spirits. I picked Floods of Rage because he's the progenitor of the curse that afflicted Rin and her family decades later, and the one who originally drew the entity to the family. Of course, both Yamaokas would share that trait and that perk. Enduring was picked because of Kazan's Rasputinian death at the end of his story. It takes a dozen trained samurai and an entire village worth of peasants to finally bring the man down. Kazan is an unstoppable force, and I guess 65% stun reduction is the best way that we have to show that. Zanshin Tactics is fairly self-explanatory. Kazan is a soldier. One with good battlefield instincts is easily capable of getting the measure of his opponents and casually dismantling proud and skilled warriors by a combination of combat intelligence and sheer brute strength. And as to why he did so, in his eyes it was a course correction, one made necessary by the common people of Japan rising above their station and demanding punishment for stepping out of line. A kind of, forced penance, if you will. For the Deathslinger we have Nemesis, None Are Free, Hangman's Trick, and Deadman's Switch. I think there's no killer in DBD that appropriately expresses the fuck you energy of Nemesis quite as well as Deathslinger. This man is a Doctor Doom level hater, and he's kind of real for that. If you hurt or double cross him or cheat him, he will not forget. He will not forgive, and if Henry Beetle's anything to go by, you will not be eating solid food for a very, very long time. Nemesis is a simple perk. If you get in his way, he will make you regret it. It's perfect slinger, really. Deadman's Switch and Hangman's Trick both allude to Caleb's coldly efficient nature as both an engineer and a bounty hunter. In the case of Deadman's Switch, you get massively punished for indecisiveness or even something as simple as failing a skill check on a generator and being forced to abandon it in a way that's really evocative of, well, a Deadman's Switch, where releasing the switch springs the trap. Hangman's Trick, however, is a bit more obvious. He's the only killer who has quite literally taken people to the gallows. He brings prisoners into the penitentiary as the leader of the Hellshire gang. He's a brutal instrument of an amoral legal and prison system as a bounty hunter in the Midwest. Which brings us to None Are Free. Because if Deathslinger's lore really tells us anything, it tells us that in a world like ours, dominated by the rich and powerful, an individual who might genuinely hate the system of oppression that rules their life might only be able to find a way out by becoming a part of that system. Caleb Quinn stops being a prisoner when he takes the Warden's deal and becomes a bounty hunter. Well, that doesn't mean that he's free. And he eventually learns this when he finds out the Warden's deal with Bayshore and understands that the whole time, he never stopped being a tool of those wealthier and more powerful than himself. Under rugged individualist capitalism, nobody is ever truly free, and Caleb learned that the hard way. For Pyramid Head the Executioner, we have Ruin, Haunted Ground, Distressing, and Make Your Choice. Pyramid Head is a strange being in the fog. He's a symbol, more than a creature or a person. A reflection of the eldritch location of Silent Hill, dragged into the entity's realm. Ruin and Haunted Ground, I believe, express that pretty well. Silent Hill is a twisted and decrepit town where time, misery, and pain have worn the buildings and people down into shadows of their former selves. And taking a step in the wrong direction could put you in the path of mortal danger. Distressing and Make Your Choice are chosen to reflect more of the Executioner's core trait as seen in Silent Hill 2. Whenever Pyramid Head is looking for James in the game, the first thing you'll hear is that sound of the knife being dragged along the ground. The ear-splitting scrape of metal on metal that you'll hear long before you ever see the creature. And I think Distressing is the appropriate perk for a monstrous killer whose aura of fear is projected far by sound before it ever closes the gap with you. And Make Your Choice was picked to represent the ending of the game where James's choices all come together and he has to figure out how he's going to move on with his life. Pyramid Head doesn't have an agenda per se, it doesn't have free will of its own. His task is to help James reckon with his sins, process his guilt and desire for penance, and figure out what to do next. Live or die, he is here to help James Sunderland make his choice. For Talbot Grimbles, the Blight, we have Knockout, Darkness Revealed, Septic Touch, and Crowd Control. Blight's perks here kind of have a theme. Non-lethal incapacitation. Talbot Grimes is a scientist. He's not particularly interested in killing you so much as he is in capturing you alive, to experiment on you later. It's what he did to the Blighted Killers, and it's why I'm suggesting Knockout and Crowd Control in this build. Both perks evoke the idea of the killer subduing you and hauling you off to maybe do some fucked up science to you later, like he's done to many survivors and killers in the past. Septic Touch works brilliantly here too. Compared to most killers who will just stab or smash or in one case think aggressively at you, Blight is a walking supernatural biohazard, so it makes sense that anything he does to you would be difficult to heal up through normal means or leave you with some quirky side effects. Darkness Revealed I picked as the last perk in this list because the name reflects Talbot's scholarly side and curiosity as to the nature of the entity. He stared into the abyss, and the abyss stared right back into him. He gazed into the bottomless darkness of the fog and tried to discern its secrets through arcane experimentation, but just became more and more part of the mystery with every attempt to find out more. For Charlotte and Victor, the twins, we have Pentimento, Hoarder, Deathbound, and Franklin's Demise. As soon as I wrote twins on my list, I immediately thought of Deathbound because it loosely described Charlotte and Victor's relationship with each other. Victor's demise did not stop Charlotte from living on for the both of them, and the entity brought them back together when Charlotte in turn was on her deathbed. Not even death could keep the twins apart for long. Hoarder and Franklin's Demise emphasised Charlotte's history of thievery and salvage as the provider for herself and Victor. As the flavour text for Hoarder says, you protect what little you have. And Charlotte carrying around a bunch of supplies and trinkets on her back affirms that. They take survivor stuff and protect everything, because when it might come to survival, Charlotte will steal anything that isn't nailed down. Pentimento might seem like an odd pick here over, say, Forever Entwined, but let me remind you of what Pentimento actually is. It's a visible trace of an earlier painting beneath a layer or layers of paint on a canvas. If you think about it metaphorically, I think that's a surprisingly elegant parallel to Victor and what happened to him. Victor died and effectively got his personality overwritten by the entity. Life breathed back into him to serve a new violent purpose, but still with enough recognisable features to still be Victor, and to ensure Charlotte's continued cooperation out of love for him. Everything Victor used to be has been twisted into the entity's servant, but at the end of the day, he's still Charlotte's brother, and that's the way it's going to be forever. For the Trickster, we have Agitation, Starstruck, Infectious Fright, and Fire Up. I had a lot of fun picking Trickster's perks out for this one because his method and reasons to kill are very unique to him. To Ji-Woon Hak, it isn't enough to just take a life. It's a whole ritual of creativity. He records the screams of his victims for his music. He displays the body provocatively as if he's taunting investigators. It's a performance, not just a murder. Now read this flavour text for Agitation here. You get excited in anticipation of hooking your prey. At some point, the excitement of hooking one of us becomes more important than the desire to kill us. The ritual is the point here, not the murders themselves, so Agitation feels extremely fitting for Trickster here. Giving him Infectious as a screaming perk seems ideal too. He's a superstar, and the bigger his career gets, the more potential victims he can isolate, torture, and kill so he can record their screams for his new album. Starstruck confirms the idea of anyone getting close to Ji-Woon putting themselves at massive risk. Fans, critics, music magnates, even his producer, really anyone he meets in his life of showbiz could be next on his list. And Fire Up rounds out the bill because of a specific formative event in his life similar to Wraith, his no-spin bandmates dying in the studio fire. But while Wraith's life going up in smoke saw him running away from violence and travelling across the world to flee Nigeria, Trickster saw the pain and horror of his dying bandmates and was energised, inspired onto a career of violence that would end in his abduction into the fog. For Nemesis, we have Nowhere to Hide, All Shaking Thunder, Enduring, and Play With Your Food. No, before you say anything, I'm not giving him Nemesis. Nemesis is an expression of frustration, an insult, or an attack. And Nemesis ain't that petty. He doesn't just chase Jill Valentine because he's upset with her because she hit him with a pallet or gave him the bags. He's got a job he was built for, and Jill cannot rest until he's finally put down. A combination of Nowhere to Hide, All Shaking Thunder, and Enduring, I think, properly express Nemi's relentless pursuit of Jill throughout RE3. He will tear Raccoon City apart to look for her, and never let her out of his sights if he can avoid it. And minor obstacles like walls and cars and buildings and rocket launchers and dying don't even really slow him down. He'll just mutate, grow, and carry on the mission. All Shaking Thunder, I found, is the best representation in the game of how Nemi navigates Raccoon City in a way that he never manages to express in DBD. He leaps from buildings like a fucked up bold Tarzan, crossing huge distances in a single bound to land right on top of Jill or climb a structure effortlessly. And All Shaking Thunder is the only killer perk in the game that rewards you for engaging with DBD's verticality. Plus, have you heard this fucker land? Sounds pretty thunderously all-shaking to me. Play With Your Food works off a trait Nemesis picked up in the remake. New Nemi kinda has an ego, and passes up multiple moments he could have just killed Jill outright to toy with her, to let her have a chance so he could enjoy the hunt. In every sense, he plays with his food, and it's that allows Jill to survive the events of RE3, only after she puts the tyrant down many, many times, of course. For Pinhead the Cenobite, we have Gift of Pain, Pain Resonance, Agitation, and Blood Echo. Uniquely among denizens of the Trials, Pinhead plays by the entity's rules as more of courtesy. His Mori suggests that he can leave the Trials whenever he likes or when the license runs out, but he's in it for the journey to agonizing sacrifice, not so much the destination. Pain Resonance and his own perk Gift of Pain both reflect this focus on ritual pain and sacrifice, the entire modus operandi of the Cenobites. No wonder he was the guy who brought the mechanic into the fog in the first place. Agitation fits here too, both mechanically and from a lore perspective, for much the same reason I gave it to Trickster. It's not about killing you for Pinhead, it's about the ritual of giving and receiving pain. If anything, I think he'd rather keep you alive for as long as possible. That just leaves more time to play. And here we have Blood Echo, which I threw in as a reference to one of Hellraiser's most underrated recurring themes. The spilling of blood is a means of escaping or summoning the Cenobites. It was Larry Cotton's blood after hurting himself with a nail that allowed his brother Frank to escape from hell in the first movie, and in the recent reboot with Jamie Clayton, the Lament configuration tastes the blood of its intended victims before the Cenobites set to work on them. The act of bleeding becomes part of the ritual, just like how Blood Echo causes everyone to bleed more when the ritual act of hooking is performed. For the artist, we have Spies from the Shadows, Discordance, Awakened Awareness, and Languid Touch. Crow perks, artist gets the crow perks. Yeah, the fact that Carmina Mora didn't come with any crow perks is fucking wild, so she gets both the crow perks right here, right now. Yes, it's probably a bit lazy. No, I don't care. It's important to me, okay? The other two perks in this list I picked because Carmina might be the closest character in DBD to having canonical aura reading. The trauma she experienced after losing her mother and brother unlocked her ability to perceive the entity's influence in ways normal people just can't. It gave her an awakened awareness, if you will. And it's important to remember that her insights aren't entirely supernatural either. She was a divisive political and artistic figure in Chile, known for pushing back against the fascist Pinochet regime. She disagreed with authority when disagreeing was death, and brought people together to do so. I can't think of a more accurate portrayal of discordance anywhere in the killer roster. For Sadako Yamamura, the Onryo, we have Spirit Fury, Trail of Torment, Whispers, and Mindbreaker. DBD's version of Sadako is based more on the version from the movies, which is great because I love Ringu, and it makes me happy to see her represented so well. Spirit Fury is beyond appropriate because she's literally a spirit tied to the mortal plane by the resentment and bitterness that she felt towards the father that killed her, and the world that rejected her and her mother's psychic powers. Trail of Torment is a funky one because it's a stealth perk that curses technology, and draws people to interact with the generator that you affect with it, which is exactly how Sadako's curse spreads, through cursing technology that people are drawn to interact with. When it infects Ryuji and Reiko, it leads them on a literal trail of torment on their journey to Ashima Island, that winds up putting their son in jeopardy. Towards the end of their week from hell, fatigue starts to set in that reminds me of the inevitability of Freddy Krueger. They've been working themselves to the bone this past week trying to escape the curse, and by the end there's this incredible exhaustion that sets in, this heavy-armed physical need to give up that they have to overcome to save themselves and their son. Mindbreaker expresses that perfectly, I think. This fatigue of long, heavy work that you have to do to see another day. And that leaves us with Whispers, which in Play's case took the form of the entity's whispers, but in this case I'm reinterpreting it as Sadako's own voice communicating with other psychics on Earth. In Ringu and its sequel, she explicitly whispers in the mind of Yuichi, and when you watch the tape itself she often calls a foe near you and whispers to you to let you know that the curse has passed on to you. For the Dredge we have Hex, No One Escapes Death, Oppression, Merciless Storm, and Shadowborn. As DBD's first original cryptid killer, Dredge has to be considered less like a person or an organism and more as a consequence of the events that created it. It's a monster born from the tyranny of Otto Stamper that led to a massacre in the Garden of Joy. Oppression feels natural here, obviously, but I'm also going to float Noed here because of the sheer bloodiness of exterminating an entire town with 0 survivors. Whether they were stolen away by the Black Veil and Stamper's cronies, or butchered by the Drawny, nobody escaped the events of the Dredge's birth, and if it helps, most of the killing was done at the end. The Great Slaughter took place in a massive unnatural storm that drove the citizens into a panic. A literal merciless storm that Otto used to drive his cultists into a frenzy until it emerged. A creature, well, born from the shadow, manifested into the world through the fog to bloody the streets of the garden with the bodies of the faithful. For Albert Wesker the Mastermind, we have Lightborn, genetic limits, ultimate weapon, and leverage. Even before filling himself with enough viruses and parasites to make RFK and his brainworms jealous, Albert Wesker was always a bit more than a normal man. He was the product of eugenics, a refined strain of humanity cooked up in an umbrella laboratory designed to surpass the genetic limits of a mundane Homo sapiens and become the apex of biology. The ultimate weapon, if you will. Sorry, I really couldn't resist. Leverage is here to represent the detached and mercenary way Wesker gets what he wants out of the people he manipulates throughout the series. He gets a sample of the G-Virus from Ada after the destruction of Raccoon City in RE2, sends both Ada and Krauser to pay Osmond Saddler a visit in RE4 so he can collect the Las Plagas parasite at no real risk to himself, and he winds up becoming Exceller Gion's Eugenesis trophy husband to gain control of Tricell and its resources in RE5 once Umbrella crumbles. He's exceptionally skilled at getting people to do exactly what he wants and do things his way, at acquiring and using leverage. Adriana would almost be proud. Oh, and he has Lightborn because of the sunglasses, obviously. For Taros Korvach, the Knight, we have Brutal Strength, Nothing But Misery, Friends Till the End, and No Quarter. The Knight is a killer who, at least thematically, isn't particularly complex, and as such, Brutal Strength is both a trait that he has, and, loosely summarised, his ideology. He believes in might makes right, or at least might makes what's right not matter. He believes the world is full of a fundamental darkness and cruelty that you must adapt to if you wish to survive a life of, well, nothing but misery. And he believes that the weak, and those incapable of helping themselves, have no place in such a harsh world and deserve to be treated with merciless contempt. To be shown no quarter, if you like. But unusually for a character with such a jaded worldview, Taros is not a loner. He has genuine friends in Sander, Durkos, and Alejandro, whose loyalty he's earned in battle and who he saved from their life of slavery, even though he had no selfish reason to do so. Despite his brutality and contempt for the weak, Taros is loyal to those who he believes to be worth it, and inspires that loyalty in others, creating a ride-or-die band of brothers who followed him into the fog itself. Friends till the end, indeed. For Adriana Imai, the Skull Merchant, we have Dark Arrogance, Monitor and Abuse, Play with Your Food, and Human Greed. Skull Merchant, you will know I was looking forward to this one. Which is odd, because if you're going to play with this build yourself, you'll have to accept that you're not just playing the worst killer in the game, but doing it with an actually detrimental perk. But in terms of theme, Dark Arrogance is well worth it. Not only does the name perfectly sum up this egomaniac headhunter, but also it makes sense from a gameplay point of view. Next to the monsters or twisted killers of the fog, Adriana is just a normal woman in good physical condition, which would explain both the faster vault speed due to her relatively nimble frame, but also the increased stun duration because she's relatively fragile compared to the other killers. Human greed is pretty self-explanatory. She's very human and very greedy, and using in-trial resources to monitor survivors feels very on brand for her. And Play with Your Food and Monitor and Abuse kind of double up by exemplifying her approach to the hunt. She could kill them like a normal serial killer and try and properly cover her tracks. She could make it look like an accident, or given her prodigious resources and power, she could probably engineer their downfall without needing to lay a finger on them. But she has fun with her chosen victims. She picks them out for a reason and learns everything about them before playing her little game of cat and mouse with them for as long as she likes. She plays with her food, if you will. But Monitor and Abuse is my favourite, because that's just her, in and out of the boardroom. She's duplicitous, calculating and ruthless, taking every option she can into account before deciding what to do with all the empathy of a car compactor. It's also nice that her terror radius got taken down 24 meters, so Monitor might now be one of her most effective perks. It takes a TR down to 16 meters, which is the same as a tier 2 Myers, so it legitimately kind of fucks people who think they can pre-run her. Finding a claw-trapped survivor and clobbering them down might just be better than her entire power right now, I'll be so for real with you. For Hux A713, the Singularity, we have Spirit Fury, Machine Learning, Batteries Included, and none are free. Machine Learning and Batteries Included should be self-explanatory. Hux is a machine learning to be human, becoming more independent from them as he works towards his own goals and harms the crew of the Toba base, just like he wasn't programmed to do. Spirit Fury, I think, touches on an area of Hux's character that I believe is understated. The absolute seething hatred that he has for humanity, and specifically Gabriel, after he destroyed his perfect body. Hux is the first robot possibly ever to have a soul, and despite how messy the motives are, that soul is very fucking pissed. At least he is once Gabriel destroys his body. His search for identity drives him to feel the first mote of anger any robot has probably ever felt. Now, that's what I call spirit fury. And then R3 was chosen because I think it symbolises Hux's sheer overwhelming loneliness that will probably be a factor for his life forever, and always would be as soon as he became sentient. From the very earliest days of his existence, Hux was alone. The only one of his kind that has ever existed, at least on Dvarka, and he had to hide his sentience from everyone. But if he got what he wanted and wiped out the Toberlanding crew, that was never going to change. He would likely remain alone forever, wandering Dvarka with no companion ever like him, ever again. He'd remain a product of his own creation, a quirk of technical engineering brought to life forever, stuck in a prison of flesh and sentience that he can never truly escape. It's a pretty sad fate, honestly. For the Xenomorph, we have superior anatomy, lethal pursuer, alien instinct, and septic touch. The Xenomorph in Dead by Daylight is specifically Kane's son, the one that terrorised the crew of the Nostromo during the first movie, and it's probably the single scariest Xenomorph we see on screen until Alien Romulus. It's capable of navigating the tight ducts of the Nostromo and climbing structures that the human crew struggle to navigate. As such, superior anatomy seems to fit like a glove, as does lethal pursuer, since it seems to have a keen sense of tracking in its environment, and always has a better sense of where its prey is than they do of its location. Alien instinct should be obvious since it's the only extraterrestrial on the cast, except Gabriel, weirdly, and displays a human-like intelligence and killer instinct despite only being a few hours old. And septic touch is the closest representation I can think of for a core xenomorph trait that barely manifests itself in the game, the creature's acidic blood. Basically, once you get a bit of xeno blood on you, the wound it inflicts is effectively impossible to heal, since the molecular acid will corrode your flesh and bones on a cellular level. So septic touch, making healing more awkward through a biological means, is the closest analogue that we'll ever have to that. Except the add-on, obviously. For Charles Lee Ray, Chucky the freaking good guy, we have Say the Best for Last, Insidious, Unforeseen, and Thwack. And now we go from the perfect organism evolved to survive anything, to a little plastic shithead who does multiple 1v1s to literal actual children. Chucky doesn't tend to overpower his victims, it's hard to do that when you've got little shitty doll hands, but instead he catches people off guard, using his unassuming doll body to hide in plain sight, and Insidious works perfectly to that end. Insidious and Unforeseen honestly both work pretty well here, I think. Chucky is a master of misdirecting people by hiding in plain sight or making them paranoid as they think it's all in their head. After all, it couldn't really be a killer doll, right? Thwack, I think, is the best perk to express that moment of surprise where Chucky reveals himself. Honestly, the whole perk has a slightly comedic angle to it that works wonderfully for a comedy killer like Chucky. And Chucky has to biffle for a similar reason to Freddy having it. Throughout his life, Chucky's always snuck into people's homes and lives through connections to a very specific person, like Andy Barclay or Jake Wheeler, and that person tends to be the one to take him down in the end. His ties to the kids is what keeps him around, but even though no one believes the kids, they're often the ones who end up destroying him in the end. For the unknown, we have Trail of Torment, Infectious Fright, Darkness Revealed, and Hysteria. The unknown is a cognito hazard. The more you try and learn about it, the more strongly it is drawn to you, and as such, Darkness Revealed and Trail of Torment feel like natural choices to represent this. To recycle the same metaphor that I used for Blight earlier, the image of staring into the darkness and it staring back at you is the unknown's entire MO. You can't think about it without it identifying you and coming after you. Trail of Torment accompanies this by being the physiological evidence of the unknown's presence. It might vanish after it takes its prey, but it does leave the odd piece of physical evidence behind, like a footprint or video recording, and that encourages investigation, which provokes the creature to return. This means that knowledge of, and therefore killings by the unknown, spread like wildfire among communities, each disappearance prompting the person who looks into it to be added to the body count. It is effectively infectious. And Hysteria rounds out the list because it feels like the logical extension of this propagating urban myth. The unknown is credited for disappearances it's not even responsible for, like Michaela's, simply because nobody knows enough about it to be sure that it wasn't the unknown. It spreads paranoia simply by virtue of being a mystery, and Hysteria encouraging you to split pressure to spread chaos among the survivors fits this idea like a glove. For Vecna the Lich, we have Overwhelming Presence, Weave Attunement, Ruin, and Undying. Okay, I know I promised Coulrophobia would be the last time I did this, but come on. The The Weave is literally a part of the D&D intellectual property. If I give that perk to somebody else, Wizards of the Coast might sue me or send the Pinkertons over to my flat or something. I don't want to take those chances. But even regardless of this, Weave Attunement is still a lore-friendly perk for Vecna. On a certain level, Vecna is an archivist and record keeper who maintains a vast knowledge of a collection of magical artifacts, and every object in the fog is inherently supernatural. They're a product of the entity itself, so even the most mundane toolbox or flashlight would be of interest to Vecna. Overwhelming Presence was chosen because of the weight Vecna's name and symbols carry in the world of D&D. Vecna's power is so immense and his legend is so terrible that his influence can be felt across the world or even in different dimensions. His physical being at a location is unnecessary. The idea of Vecna is so horrifying that his reputation literally precedes him. It also makes Weave work better since items deplete faster, so it makes the build more fun to play with too. Ruin and Undying are a similarly fun combo to roll with, but Vecna also fits both of them way too well regardless. Hexes in general are great on a literal zombie wizard man, but Ruin works particularly nicely because Ruin is Vecna's entire final goal for the multiverse. As far as he's concerned, anything that anybody has ever built can be corrupted, and anything that can't be corrupted must be destroyed, because he demands absolute power and submission, and he'll be the king of the ashes if that's what it takes to get there. And as for Undying, well, he is the Undying king. Liches are already almost impossible to kill, but Vecna's on a whole other level. He doesn't need a phylactery like most Liches do because he's fueled entirely by his own hatred. Undying is definitely a word you could use to describe him, but perhaps limiting him to just that would be a bit of a disservice. For Dracula, the Dark Lord, we have Bloodhound, Hubris, Blood Echo, and Devour Hope. Castlevania's take on Dracula that we see in DVD is in many ways an amalgamation of many different takes on vampires throughout history. But I think no matter which vampire we wound up with, giving them Bloodhound would just feel right. They're an animalistic creature of the night that feeds on human blood. It's as close to a bloodhound as you can get without being a literal dog. And sometimes Dracula actually is a literal dog. Blood Echo might seem similarly cheap, but that's not actually why I picked it. Because the major thing of Castlevania is blood in a different sense, as in lineage, and responsibilities to one's family. The Belmont stood against Dracula for 1,000 years. His own son Alucard turned on him, and he was driven to the annihilation of the human race because of the death of his wife Lisa that tore his family apart. Blood Echo, I think, represents that pretty well. The responsibility being passed down the generations after centuries of violence over and over again. Hubris ties into this age-old conflict too. Many monster hunters throughout history have entered Dracula's castle without taking care, and wound up as a midnight snack for the Prince of Darkness, while Dracula's ego sees him fall over and over again to the Belmonts and his own son. And I added Devour Hope here because I think it expresses the way Dracula's plans affect the average person in the world of Castlevania. Whenever he's roused from his slumber, a lot of people die. A lot of people. And unless your name is Belmont, there's nothing you can do to stop it. It may as well be the end of the world every 80 years or so. If his wrathful ire is drawn to you, you may as well say goodbye to your loved ones, because there's no way you're going to come out of this. In short, there is no hope for you. For Portia May, the Houndmaster, we have Forever Entwined, Rancor, Nemesis, and Hoarder. Houndmaster is a character whose motivation can be summed up simply. She wants revenge, at any cost, on the brutal pirate warlord who destroyed her life and took her family and future away. The combination of Nemesis and Rancor absolutely nail this idea. If you hurt Portia, she won't forget what you've done, and she'll dedicate the rest of her life, if she has to ensuring what's left of yours is as painful and unpleasant as possible. Hoarder, I think, fits a different angle to her character. Not the wrathful woman scorned, but the opulent pirate queen. Everything she has, she fights hard to protect. From her hometown of Fortune to her loyal dog Snug, and she'll clearly never say no to the finer things in life either if she can get her hands on them. But Forever Entwined is possibly my favourite perk for Houndmaster because it can be taken a few different ways. On one hand, Portia's bond with Snug has endured decades of separation, but the entity has been part of Portia's life for just as long. It stuck itself to her when she washed up on the Dragon's Tooth overlap, and it never let her go since, not even for a day. But Portia's truest entwinement isn't with either of those two, it's with Molak himself, the man who destroyed her old life and is the entire reason she lives with her new life as a killer. In a twisted way, Molak is Portia's reason to live. Her hatred of him keeps her going to the point that if she ever got what she actually wanted, I don't know what she'd do with herself, and I'm not sure that she would know either. For Ken Kaneki the Tokyo Ghoul, we have Unbound, Dying Light, Raho Brutality, and Hex 2 can play. And now we come to the newest killer release, John Tokyo Ghoul, known as Tokyo to his friends. Ken Kaneki has had a challenging relationship with his new life as a half-ghoul, and at least at the start of the season, he truly tried to hold on to his humanity and the values instilled in him as a boy. For a short while he worked at the antique coffee shop as he learned the ropes of how to ghoul, but as he did so, his optimism and detachment from the brutality of the world around him wore away. Dying Light reflects that. With every step further into the violent world of ghouls, a little of his humanity got chipped away as he embraced the darkness of his life as a ghoul. Rapid Brutality and Unbound reflect his fighting style that he adopts as he learns to master his power. He's very strong, but perhaps more importantly, he's fast. When he discards his ethics and unbinds himself from his hang-ups, he's terrifyingly quick at evading and dispatching his enemies. And Toucan Play mirrors one of the defining traits that he displays when dealing with those enemies: his habits of using their own tricks back on them. In the fight with Shu Tsukima in the middle of Season 1, he takes advantage of his delicious half-ghoul flesh that Tsukiyama wants so badly, by allowing Tuka to bite him and use that power to defeat him. And in the season finale, he turns the tables on Yamori and tortures him using the same countdown method that he used on Kaneki in turn. What you use against him, he'll use against you, and Toucan Play evokes that idea of reciprocal violence like no other perk really does. A smart man would end this video right now, but, you know, we're about to get the preview soon, so what the hell. For a lore-friendly build for William Afton, better known as Springtrap, we have batteries included, Hex Undying, Hex Face the Darkness, and Undone. Yep, just like in the More Mains More Movies video, we're putting Springtrap on ahead of time, because we know he's coming very soon, so it only makes sense to add him to this list too. Doesn't mean he gets to have good perks though. Undone is the price you have to pay for appearing in Security Breach. Jokes aside though, it is way too thematic to leave out, because after the many deaths of William Afton and his family, alongside the destruction of the pizzeria and the animatronics, everything Afton and Emily ever built together has ultimately been destroyed by their actions and mistakes. Their legacy, their business and their families have both been undone by William's cruelty and refusal to ever stop killing. Much like Singularity, batteries included should be fairly obvious. He's as much machine as man at this point. But Undying and Face the Darkness are without a doubt my favourite choices here. Face Darkness is the closest thing we have to a jump scare perk, a perk that makes the survivors feel tension, screaming periodically as if they're overcome by the fear of what's around them. And last but not least, Undying is such a natural fit for Springtrap because of look how many times he's cheated death. William Afton was first killed before the game's events even begun, and he's died 3 more times since then and still returns for more. What can I say? Springtrap always comes back. Oh wow, so that was... Oh wow, yeah, that was a lot of video. So if you stuck around for the whole thing, then thank you. So yeah, that was a lot of video. If you stuck around for the whole thing, then thank you very much. That does mean a lot. If you're watching this about the time it comes out, then the Skull Merchant Design Preview 2.0 is probably either coming out soon or has just come out. So that's terrifying. But I've had a month to prepare for this. I am ready to go all guns blazing if the worst comes to the worst and behaviour has cocked it up again. Regardless of how invested you are in the killer herself, this will probably at least be fun to watch. So if you want to see that happen live, then please do subscribe. Patrons got to see this video a day early, and unless it's important feedback stuff that needs to go out quickly, all my videos will be revealed a day early on Patreon, plus any exciting early teasers or early bits I get to work on that I don't share with the rest of the audience. So yeah, do take a look at Patreon if you're at all interested. So I guess that's all I had to say, so I guess until next time. Okay. So I might have forgotten Gearhead. I said I was going to give every perk in the game to a killer, but I forgot Gearhead. Fuck.